Hey everybody, welcome to another Bring Me the News WNBA Extra. Matthew Coller here along with Eric Eager. I work for Purple Insider covering the Vikings. Eric works for Sumer Sports with the entire National Football League doing analytics. So both of us are just here to talk WNBA because we love it and because we are excited about the start of the season. We've got our WNBA stuff on, and we want to have a discussion about some predictions for this very exciting year where, Eric, I feel like the popularity of women's basketball and the WNBA coming off an amazing college season has really just ramped up, and there is a lot of excitement for this season.
Yeah, for sure. WNBA was really popular at the end last year. You had, Las Vegas, who, hosted the Aces, which was the first professional sports team in any of the major leagues that went to Vegas, wins a championship in very, I think, in amazing fashion, I would say, in a great series. Ratings are through the roof. And then, as you said, college basketball captured our hearts in March and April. I think it really leads into a great season. And, as we're going to talk about here, the two super teams that have kind of built out of this are going to keep, I think, people glued to the screens.
Absolutely. So we'll get into the super teams in just a moment, but our hometown team, the Minnesota Lynx, let's talk about them first. They once were a super team, and now every member of that super team is gone. And wow, time goes fast in sports, doesn't it? It was not too long ago where it was Augustus and Maya Moore and Waylon and Brunson and Sylvia Fowles. Now it is an entirely new lineup. It is Napheesa Collier as the centerpiece of this team, and they drafted number 2 overall, Diamond Miller. So I do feel like this team is in transition. They are establishing their star as the centerpiece of their team in Napheesa Collier. I'm very, very interested to see how quickly Diamond Miller fits in, because I think she has the potential to be a franchise centerpiece as well. But this is going to be a place that most Minnesota Lynx fans do not recognize, a team that is transitioning out of that so many years of being in the playoffs, missing it last year. And this year, I think, could have some rocky moments for them.
Yeah, for sure. Cheryl Reeve always sort of gets that team in position to win, right? And even opening night, they opened up about 3.5-point favorites against another rebuilding team, the Chicago Sky. The markets have bet them out to 5.5. I think people, believe that Cheryl Reeve will, in games between two teams that aren't very good, Cheryl Reeve is always going to try to get that team to win, even if it's to their detriment, as, they almost made the playoffs, almost missed the lottery, I believe, last year, if it weren't for Kurt Miller and his Connecticut Sun at the time, kicking them out in the last game. It's interesting, right? Because Ariel Powers, Kayla McBride are two players who I think are very much, not superstar players, but certainly very quality starters in the WNBA. And Napheesa Collier's kind of, it's weird, Minnesota basketball fans, the best that they've ever had is Kevin Garnett, and then now they, Karl Anthony Towns. And it's sort of always that there's that true superstar in the league, and then there's that second-ish tier kind of player. Garnett was kind of a true superstar who played sometimes like a second-tier player. I think Collier kind of falls right in that category, where she's not going to make the all WNBA team ever, but she's going to make a lot of all-star teams. And so, I just don't know, in a league where you have so many superstars and now they're all congregating onto a few teams, whether or not the Lynx can truly contend this year.
Yeah, that's the thing with Napheesa Collier. She does so many things well, where she is a great defender. She can hit outside shots. She can get to the basket. She's a track runner, speed player, have a lot of respect for her game. But in a league where a night in and night out, it's not just our star versus your star. It's our star versus your 3 stars when you're talking about, or your 4 or 5 in the case of Vegas and New York. And I think that is going to be an uphill battle. And while I really believe in Diamond Miller's talent, having watched a ton of her at Maryland and really dominating the Big Ten, she elevated last year. She is maybe a top 5 athlete in this league, coming in the second she's there when it comes to speed, her length. But there's going to be a lot of growing pains for rookies in this league, which when we get to our predictions is kind of one of mine for some of these rookies that get hyped a lot. It is a hard league for rookies. So I think that this team is looking at being on the fringe of the playoffs. And if we're being realistic, it's probably better for them not to be in that, because if you look at how they got Diamond Miller, it wasn't by osmosis. They got her through, getting into that lottery and getting up in the draft. So I don't ever want to say the word tank with a Cheryl Reeve team, because that's not something that Cheryl Reeve would take on. But I also think that when she mentions the year like 2010 in her press conferences, talks about the process and on a night-to-night basis playing the right way, as opposed to setting the bar where it was for so long with their Hall of Famers, with Maya Moore and with Whalen and Fowles and so forth. I mean, it's just a different time for them, but I also think it is a time to kind of be that bridge between the past and then what's going to come in the future.
Yeah, for sure. And there's so many. Yeah, and what's nice about the Lynx is that they have good enough players, as we said before, where it's not going to be like an Indiana Fever situation where you win like 5 games and it's just not competitive a lot of the time, and you're 15-point underdogs to the best teams in the league. I mean, last year we saw them thump the Aces like right around the middle, like right around the 4th of July. We've seen them be competitive. I think you're going to see that a lot this year. I don't think that they're going to be above 500 maybe necessarily, but I think that game in and game out, they're going to be competitive, and they have players that can be competitive. I mean, Rachel Banham last year kind of had like the stretch of her life where, you know, she was hitting a lot of shots. They just have a lot of players who I think are very representable WNBA players. And, you know, and to your point, like the way that you get superstars in this league is you draft high. And so they're in that kind of conundrum where you want to keep the careers of McBride and gals like that, like a little bit, you want to keep them going. But at the same time, you know that any realistic chance of competing in this league requires superstars that you can really only access at the top of the draft.
And speaking of that, Vegas and New York are the runaway favorites. And when you look at these lineups, it's just superstars only. And this is just a total side point, but there's been a lot of discussion about expanding the league. And I would like to see the league grow, but I am not going to complain about the lineups that these teams are running out and the concentration of talent between New York and Vegas. Is anybody else in the conversation? And just as a refresher, New York's lineup has Courtney Vandersloot, Sabrina Ionescu, Benijah Laney, Brianna Stewart, Jonquel Jones. You have legit players coming off of the bench for this team. I'm really interested to see how Vandersloot and Ionescu operate in New York, because that's 2 players who have the ball in their hands a lot. But I think what we saw last year that was really interesting, Eric, is a slow start for Sabrina Ionescu. But then once Sandy Brondello figured out, actually, she's better coming off of the ball, not being the one who dribbles it up, but instead coming off of the ball, getting it in her hands to score. She started to take off, and that was with like Crystal Dangerfield playing point guard. Now you have one of the greatest point guards to ever play. So, I mean, I guess how do we weigh these 2 teams against each other? Because Vegas is bringing back most of their parts, plus Candace Parker, versus New York that's being asked to have a lot of new parts come together.
Yeah, for sure. That's where the question is, if you're betting like early in the season on New York, where the last few seasons they've just started out really slowly. Even with Sandy Brondello as the coach last year, they opened the season up really slow. To your point, they went ahead. Sammy Whitcomb was kind of used on the ball. Now she's in Seattle. Dangerfield was the other point guard, and that's not as good. But you have Vandersloot now, who's been a distributor her whole career. Like, she's not wanted to be a scorer. She can score if she has to, but she doesn't really want to be a scorer. I think that's perfect there. To your point about their bench, and I think that this is where, Las Vegas Aces looked at a season where you win a championship, but you weren't perfect. New York realized you have to have the stars, but you also have to have the bench to maintain it throughout the season, to be able to get that home court advantage and stuff throughout the playoffs. You need to have a bench, and you need to be able to win the games in the middle of the season when some of the great players in this league are beat up and they're sitting out games. You look at New York, and Maureen Johannes, you have Han Shu, I believe Steph Dolson is still around. Like, you have players who have started. Steph Dolson was a starting center for a championship team in Chicago. She's maybe the second or third center on this team, behind Jonquel Jones. And, so you just have players, you can go deep. And then the Aces last year with Erica Hamby, having her, when she had to miss time, they didn't have a great bench. I mean, it was mostly Raquana Williams and Kia Stokes basically were the only 2 people that they brought off the bench in the playoffs. They go get Alicia Clark, one of the best defenders in the entire WNBA. And then obviously Candace Parker goes there. So they kind of fortify that group a little bit, even from a depth standpoint. It's going to be a clash of titans, I think, as far as those 2 teams are concerned. And it really comes down to, in my opinion, who stays healthy, basically who gets hot at the right time. Because I just don't see a situation. You look at the betting markets right now, Aces are like plus 120. The Liberty are like plus 130, and then everybody is like 10 to 1 or better or worse. I'm sorry, to win the whole league. So they are, expecting this to be the finals matchup.
Which of those two teams do you think is more fun?
I don't know. I'd always say the Aces because they run up and down the court. They gun. The Aces were one of the teams prior to Becky Hammon becoming the coach. Obviously, with Bill Laimbeer, they were, post up with Asia Wilson, post up with Liz Cambage, kind of, be very, very few 3-point shots. And then last year, Kelsey Plum was allowed to shoot as many as she wanted to. Raquana Williams obviously dug them out of a few finals games, frankly, there. And now you have Alicia Clark and Candace Parker is a very good deep shooter as well. But I think, like, when you think about, okay, who are the most fun players to watch in the league? I think, New York has more of those players. Sabrina Ionescu, Courtney Vandersloot, and Brianna Stewart are all, to me, the fun players to watch. And so then you put them on the court at the same time. I think New York's my answer, but you can't go wrong with either team, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And just watching Chelsea Gray on a night-to-night basis alone with what she can do with the basketball. I talk about somebody who was taking over in playoff games last year. She's still an incredible talent. It's probably either way because both of these teams are going to play at a high pace. I think that Vegas's chemistry is going to make them immediately more exciting. And I will be really interested to see just how the ball gets distributed because you have Brianna Stewart's going to want to score 20 a game. Sabrina's going to want to score 20. Jonquel Jones is going to want to score 20. Like, how do they make that all work? Vegas already kind of has that built in, and then Candace can find her role similarly to how she did in Chicago. But I also think that Candace understands, like, this is it for her, and she's just got to find a role with that team and do what she can, that she's not the centerpiece of a team anymore. But both teams, very exciting. Now, who's next? Who is number 3 in this league? I think is a really great discussion. I think kind of probably comes down to 2 or 3 teams. I would nominate the Connecticut Sun. They lose Jonquel Jones, but in years past, even when she wasn't playing or wasn't on the floor, they still have Brianna Jones, who is a star in this league, and Alyssa Thomas is one of the best players as well. They still have a very solid lineup. They've changed coaches, which is an interesting twist there now with Kurt Miller in Los Angeles, but they would be my nomination for potentially the third best team, but I think that they're not the only one that's going to make a run for that title.
Yeah, DeWanna Bonner is one of those players now, came over for the 3 first-round picks, like is not maybe as consistent as you necessarily want an ace player like that to be. But obviously for a team like Connecticut to beat a team like the Liberty or the Aces on any given night, you need her to put up 20, 25 points. And she's certainly capable of that. Brianna Jones, to your point, is one of the sturdiest players in the league. Now, the question I think you have to look at, like if you look at her hoop stats and stuff like that, she's one of the most valuable players in all of basketball. Can you maintain that now that you're a starter? Because there are a lot of studies in all sports that say, it's like in football we talk about like Tony Pollard. You can average 5 yards a carry off the bench. Can you average 5 yards a carry when you get all the carries? So I think a big step for her is whether or not she can continue to be amazing there. Alyssa Thomas, really tough, really, really solid player. I don't mind that choice. I think one that the betting markets really do like, because Connecticut's about 40 to 1, which is interesting. A team at 14 to 1, which is weirdly the third best odds, is the Washington Mystics. And I think this one, when you think about from a coaching standpoint, when you think about a superstar player standpoint, Elena Delle Donne is not going to sit out any games just to rest this year. So she's fully healthy after, the 2020 season she missed. And, she's just had a lot of issues. But when healthy, one of the best players in the whole league, and and defensively, one of the soundest defenses in all of basketball as well. And you think about, the especially the Aces. I think Aces can be had when they don't shoot well on a night, and if you have clamped down defense, like you can kind of exacerbate that a little bit. Same thing with New York. Now New York doesn't have a way yet because we haven't seen them play like this. But I know specifically with the Aces, it's like they basically trade off nights having 20 points, right? Plum one night, Gray one night, Asia one night. And like, if you can somehow be the team that allows none of them to have 20 points in a night, you can win. And I think Washington has that kind of defense.
Yeah, I definitely think defensively they have a lot of veteran players. And in the backcourt, someone like Natasha Cloud, just a great defensive player. Maisha Hines-Allen is a tank. They are not fun to play against, I think. I guess I bake into thinking Connecticut has maybe a little better chance. the possibility of Elena Delle Donne not playing the full season because it just doesn't happen. And trust me, I want it to happen. I mean, because she is top 3 player, if not number 1 player in the world when she's 100% healthy. That just has not been the case really since she won a championship. So that is a difficult one, I think, with Elena Delle Donne. But that overall team is very, very good. After that, there is a drop off, and it's a lot of teams who want to be next. It's an Atlanta team that I think a lot of people got excited about maybe midway through the season and then really faded toward the end of the year. I think Ryan Howard, their number 1 pick, really hit a wall last year. You look at her statistically, she started out very hot, and then in the second half of the season was shooting like 25% from 3, mid 30% from the field. So she's had an entire year of being a pro to focus on her game. But I'm not yet seeing it with her as being one of those level superstars that raises up everybody else. We'll see if that comes to fruition, but I think she has to prove that for Atlanta to be that team. And I think that Dallas has just been sort of this team that everybody talks about year in and year out with, will they take a next step? Will they take a next step? They got Natasha Howard there. I don't know if I'm really convinced. Tierra McCowan started to play better. They've got a lot of bigs on that team, but it also often comes down to Arike Gumbawale not being a very efficient scorer, where she can score 35 points on one night and be super hot and then go 3 for 17 the next night. And I think that inconsistency has landed them in the middle. And then I think the other teams are really going to have to show something to convince me that they're not kind of the bottom dwellers. Maybe there's a Phoenix run there if Brittany Griner gets back to 100% quickly. I don't expect that. I think that's really, really difficult to ask for Brittany Griner to get back to 100% of what she used to be. But is there anybody in that mix behind, as we're sort of tiering the league, behind the obvious super teams, then the next tier that are almost guaranteed playoff teams, and then after that?
Not really. I mean, you bring up Phoenix, Phoenix needs a few things to go right? I mean, Sophie Cunningham is right now, like, they view her as the 3rd best player on that team, which, I mean, we've seen Sophie at her best scoring like 30 points at the Target Center, but the consistency isn't necessarily there. She's been injured before. Taurasi, without Skylar Diggins-Smith there, Taurasi's got to like command the floor better. And like, she's just simply been too erratic from a performance as well as like a teammate perspective over the last like couple of years. And then Griner, like, if you get yeses to all 3 of those questions, then the Phoenix Mercury are absolutely a team that to be reckoned with. If Griner comes back and is who she was before, Taurasi similarly, and then Sophie Cunningham takes another step, then absolutely you have the 3 superstars you need. I'll sell the option on all 3 of those happening at once. So then you get obviously to Dallas, and as you said, Dallas, Tierra McCowan's like the one consistent player on that team, like, which is a good thing, right? She was fantastic at the end last year. When whenever I had a bet against Dallas, I always like looked up and I thought that was the dumbest thing, because she just controlled. And a lot of the WNBA, this is what makes it different from the NBA. If you have a post player that can control the basketball game, it makes the difference in this league. So, if she can continue to build on that, the issue is their 2 other best players, from a Gumbawale and Howard, like, they're just too inconsistent. So you have the high end to beat some of these great teams. But Natasha Howard she'll disappear for a month at a time. And so you don't necessarily, want that. Now, maybe you can complement her with McCowan, and then it's a good 1-2 punch, but relying on her as one of your top players to me is skeptical at best.
Okay. Any other random predictions before we wrap up? I'll throw one at you. I think that year 1 will be very, very difficult for the number 1 overall pick in the draft, Aaliyah Boston. That's not me saying she's going to be a bust, but when you go back, you just mentioned Tierra McCowan, go back and look at the bigs in their first years, how long it takes to make progress in this league. It is very hard. And I don't think that she is of the tier of an Asia Wilson or Brittany Griner, who are all-time legendary Hall of Fame level prospects the minute that they came out. I think she does have things in her game to work on, that she has to be able to get away from the basket and make shots, which she did not do very often at South Carolina. And I think that going up against 6'3" players in college who you could just kind of reach over and put the ball back up is way different from going up against the legends of the WNBA in the paint. As you mentioned, there are still many, many excellent bigs. So I think that Indiana unfortunately, is probably still in for another very tough year. I don't know if it's a 5-win year, but they have been down for a long time. I don't know if this is the year that they quite take that step. I will still have Indiana as the favorites to pick number 1 overall. And I think that it won't be until by the second half, maybe toward the end, that we start seeing Aaliyah Boston get it in the W, because I think that transition is very hard.
Yeah, the transition seems, I mean, this league, because of, and I'm with you on expansion. Like, I'd love to see this league expand, but I'd also love it to build out in the current 12 teams to where every team has this sort of identity. But because of that, like, it took Sabrina Ionescu looked overmatched physically for the first year of her career. Kelsey Plum for the first 3 years of her career was being pushed around. This is a league where the veterans' physicality is pretty substantial. And so it's just going to take a long time for that to happen, especially if you aren't, one of those athletes. We even talk about it with the Timberwolves, like the point guard they had this year, going to kind of deal with a lot of the stuff the point guard they had last year, Mariah Jefferson, had when she started out. You're really big, you're really fast, you're really athletic, you got a lot of tools, but you're just going to get shoved around your first couple of years. And that's a real big, issue in this league. When you look at the FanDuel market for WNBA awards, you look at MVP, right? So you have like Breanna Stewart's about 3-1, Aisha Wilson's about 3-1, Elena Delle Donne is about 6-1, Kelsey Plum at 15-2, Sabrina Ionescu at 19-2 or so. Looking around at this, Jonquel Jones is 40-1 to be the league MVP. I kind of like that bet. I'm not saying she's going to win it. I'm not saying that she's even the best player on that team. But at 40-1, we've seen bigs in this league have years that end up garnering a lot of attention. You even look at Sylvia Fowles here in Minnesota when they were a super team at the sort of very end of the Maya Moore era, win that award. I think if you're looking for a good bet to make on the market, I think Jones at 40-1. If that team, builds on that promise and sort of the Stewarts, the Ionescus, the Johannes's and the Vandersloot's kind of eat into each other's production, she could end up being the statistical star on that team.
Yeah, I could see that. I thought you were going to go the Sabrina route because I could see Sabrina doing a ton of scoring for that team. But you wonder about them all eating into each other's MVP candidacy of, if they're all kind of distributing a lot of the point totals and things like that. It might just be whichever team ends up with the best record and whichever player scores the most for either one of those teams. But Stewart and Asia Wilson, I think, probably have the best odds there. That is not a hot take prediction, but I think it would take a lot to take down either one of those two teams. So we will check in throughout the season when we are inspired to talk WNBA. So appreciate everybody watching this WNBA Extra, and we will catch you again very soon. Enjoy your WNBA opening week.